Thank you for joining us today at Naturally Scott with Scott Harris. Not surprisingly, I'm Scott Harris, and I'll be your host on this journey. At least once a week, I'll bring you the very best of America's spectacular world of nature, from birds to mammals to reptiles and amphibians, from soaring mountains to endless plains, from rugged coastlines to rivers and streams. Each episode will feature an expert guest, a ranger, a researcher, a birder, or an adventurer, someone who has seen what we want to see and been where we want to go. This isn't just another nature show, it's a safari for your ears. Now let's get started on today's adventure. Hey, welcome to the show, Naturally Scott with Scott Harris. Not too surprisingly, I'm Scott Harris. My guest today is Laura Erickson. Very excited to have Laura on. Laura is also a guest in the book I've told you about, Why We Love Birds. She was gracious enough to agree to be in that, and through that process, we met and have gotten to know each other a little bit, and I'd like to think we're becoming friends. I've certainly enjoyed our conversations and email and text exchanges, so I'm really excited about having Laura on the show. Let me share with you, this is a list. Laura is and has been a scientist, a teacher, a writer, a licensed wildlife rehabber, a blogger, a speaker, a photographer. There's probably more, but that's all that can fit on my 4x6 card. So that's what we're going to go with today.
You could go with Grandma.
We could go with Grandma. And you have a nickname as a grandma.
Dee Dee Nana.
Dee Dee Nana. It's okay, fair enough. Dee Dee Nana it is. We're excited about that. A lot of things to talk to you about today, Laura. I had some questions of my own. I kind of wanted to go over one or two that we've already done with Why We Love Birds. And you had set a couple of recommended things that you thought might be kind of fun to discuss today. But let's start with For the Birds. Tell me what For the Birds is.
I started it as a radio show back in 1986. I didn't fit in with Duluth's birding community very well. It was dominated by one person who is just a fantastic birder. But because of that, I wasn't even allowed by Duluth Audubon to lead free field trips the way I had done before we moved here. I was just at sixes and sevens about how to fit in and carve a niche for myself. So I started doing a radio show. It was really fun. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but a person at the UMD radio station, the University of Minnesota, she taught me how to do my own production work so I could mix in bird songs. And I just started blathering about birds 3 times a week because I'd written 3 scripts. I had no idea how long to make them or anything. I just put it together as something that maybe I could do. I showed up at the station with 3 scripts, one about hummingbirds, one about orioles, and one about feeding birds in spring. And uh, because she liked it, she said, okay, you have 3 scripts, let's do it 3 times a week. And I was never paid for it. It was always as a volunteer. But that's what evolved into my podcast. I learned how to, this was back in 1986 when everything was open reel. I'd record my voice, then I'd go through and using the razor blade and the special tape, uh, get rid of all my errors, which I cannot do when we're live. And then I would mix in the bird sounds onto another tape and put it all together. And within the first year, other local stations in Minnesota and Wisconsin started picking it up. And suddenly I was blathering about birds to a wider net. And little by little, I do not do self promotion. I just don't know how, and I don't feel comfortable with it. But little by little, people would find out about it and ask if I would send it to their station too. And so I did.
Well, that's fantastic. Now that original radio show morphed into a podcast.
It morphed once it could go digital And once podcasts began, I started, I think, in like 2007, making it an actual podcast on iTunes. But it was still going on my via my web page to the radio stations, and several stations still carry it. But it's also been a podcast
And
for almost 20 years.
are you currently doing the podcast?
Oh yeah,
How
it's
often?
it. Whenever I write a blog post, that my blog posts on Substack are also called For the Birds, and that's the original text I write um, for my radio program. Only I have freedom in my blog For the Birds to put in photos and to flesh it out a little bit more than it gets on, because the radio station, I'm still trying to keep it under 5 or 6 minutes. And so it has, the blog is more fleshed out. But yeah, I've been blathering about birds on Duluth's public radio station for almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years next year on May 12th.
Well, congratulations. That's quite an anniversary, and very, very few people can make a similar claim. So I'm excited for you that you've been doing it that long. I had the experience a handful of years ago. I used to play blues harmonica, but oh shoot, I forget the name of it now. But there's a blues show, and it's a radio show. It's been a Monday through Friday daily show, the Flower Hour. I forget what the name of it is, but it's the longest running radio show in the world. And they had me on as a guest, and I got to play live, and that was a fantastic thing. I really enjoyed it. But you're rivaling their length, so congratulations to you. Now
Well,
you're
mine is the longest running radio program about birds in the Americas. There may be still one going on in Japan that started before
okay.
mine did, but
Well, congratulations on that as well. Now you're also an author. You've written more than a dozen books about birds. And the most recent one is 100 Plants to Feed the Birds.
correct.
Okay, tell us about that book and tell us about feeding birds. You had mentioned to me that you wanted to talk about that. So obviously there's the plants. I want to hear about that. But then you also have some ideas on what we could be putting out for the birds to make their life a little healthier and a little easier. So if you would jump in on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, I've written a few books for story publishers, starting when I was the science editor at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Story Publishing had asked me to write the bird watching answer book. And that was my first assignment working at Cornell. And so they called me up right at the start of the pandemic and asked me to write this plant bird. And I did not want to call it 100 Plants to Feed the Birds, because many birds do eat seeds and nectar and things from plants. But the main thing, plants provide nutrition for birds, is not the plant itself, it's the insects that the plant supports. And so I wanted it to be 100 plants to help the birds, but that was written in stone, the title, because it was part of a series of plants to feed the bees and plants to feed the monarchs. So I was stuck with the title, but also my first comment when she asked me to write it came straight from Star Trek. I said, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a bird watcher, not a horticulturist." But my experience with plants and knowledge of plants is really limited to what they do for birds. And I'm not a very good gardener. We do have some like bee balm and some serviceberry and several kinds of native plants here, but I'm not a gardener. So I thought I was a bad choice to write it, but I do know how to research. And I apparently did the research well enough that it won the the American Horticultural Association's 2023 book award. So it apparently
Well,
does hold up for from the horticultural standpoint as well as the bird
perhaps you're
standpoint.
more of a horticulturist than you thought that you were.
Well, I talk. The problem is this was going to be marketed throughout the United States and Canada. And so it had to be very much more general than it would be if I was writing for the Midwest. And so I talked about like oaks as one entity is oak trees and how critical they are for acorns, but also for all the wonderful insects that they supply to, like, I very often see my first scarlet tanager of the year in an oak tree. And they don't eat acorns, but they eat the little tiny critters that are in the buds. And so I talk about the families, and people still have to rely on their own local um, native plant societies to know which ones of these to select.
In
I
the
talk
exact
about,
region that they live in.
right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because things should not just be Native American plants and not just native to even your state, if it's a state as big as Minnesota, but native to your general area, your local area. That does make a difference as far as supporting the insects that our local birds depend on.
Okay. Now, you had prompted me to ask you about feeding birds, and you had
In
some thoughts
summer,
along those lines. So please share those with us. Educate us on how to speak and how to feed birds.
it's really important when the weather is hot, and we're under an enormous heat dome right now in most of the country. Some things are just bad choices in the summer because they can go bad. They can get goopy, things like suet. I have woodpeckers who come to my suet every day, but I have to take it in at night because all of a sudden I have a bear in the neighborhood. But you have to make sure that it stays, if it starts melting and getting goopy, get rid of it and get new stuff. Um,
In this kind of
some
in this kind of heat, how long would a suet cake last?
uh, well, you don't put it out unless the birds are using it up within a week or you change it over.
Okay.
A week or two is good.
Okay.
Hummingbird nectar must be changed very frequently during hot weather. As soon as you make your sugar water mixture, little by little, it starts fermenting. Microbes start the fermentation process. And so even when it still looks quite clear, hummingbirds drinking from it are taking in intoxicants. And the fresher it is, the less of those there are. I think a good rule is if it's you shouldn't leave it out any longer than you would want a toddler to be drinking Kool-Aid after it's been left out because it starts going bad. If you see any little black yucky stuff in there, you've gone too long. And if insects get through and are in the water, you have to change it right away too because they contaminate it. Um, so changing the sugar water under normal conditions, I change. I live in Duluth, Minnesota, where it's often very cool. Like even right now, it's 77 here, where it's over 100 already in a lot of places, a little south of here. So I can go like 3 days between changes unless it gets into the 80s and 90s. I change it every 2 days or often every 1 day when it gets up to the 90s.
Okay.
Bird baths are really important to keep clean because in the bird bath, you start getting mosquitoes lay their eggs in bird baths, and the mosquitoes that are most likely to carry things like West Nile virus and things are the ones that go in the little, the Tonka truck left in the sandbox or the bird bath or the old tire. Those are the ones that carry diseases too. And so you do not want the bird bath water to be sitting there long enough for the mosquito to lay the eggs to hatch, and the little larvae to come out as adults.
Now,
So
for those of
every
us with bird baths that have bubblers, that's pretty good at mosquito prevention, right? Because the water's
um,
moving.
It depends. The moving water is less likely to support mosquitoes than still water, but there are mosquitoes that use a lot of different conditions. So I change my mosquito, also the birds don't just drink from our bird baths, they bathe in them and they poop in them. And so all those reasons are good ones to change the
Okay.
water fairly frequently.
While we're on bird behavior, talk to me about sunning and anting.
Um, Sunning and anting are two different things that birds do to help get rid of lice and mites, and in the case of sunning, to clean their feathers too. With sunning, the bird will find a place that's nice and secluded where it can go into a trance for a few minutes without being too afraid of predators. It'll look like it's dying. It will keel over on one side. The upper wing facing the sun will be wide open. It'll usually be panting. It'll raise its head feathers, neck feathers, and back feathers, and it'll be in a trance, and unless you get really close, sometimes it won't notice you because it's not paying attention. And that feels good for the bird, but the sun actually reaches the bird's skin. And that's how birds produce vitamin D, the same as us. And also, it raises the temperature of the feathers and opens them up. There's sunlight getting in, and that makes the lice and mites start moving around. When the bird is done, it immediately goes to a place and where it's again kind of secluded and preens vigorously to get rid of all those lice and mites that were embedded in the feathers. Anting is the bird, there's two different kinds of anting. There's active anting and passive anting. With active anting, the bird will pick up an ant or sometimes a cigarette butt or a mothball. Some people put mothballs in their garden. It'll hold it in its beak and scrape it on its feathers. And that also does uh, ants' bodies. If you remember high school biology, ants belong to the family Formicidae, and that's because formic is for formic acid. Their bodies produce formic acid both on the inside but also on the outside. That's why ants can scurry around sidewalks without hardly any birds coming and eating them, because they taste bitter. And some birds use take advantage of that bitterness. They won't eat the ant, but they'll smear it on its feathers. The formic acid probably acts as an insect repellent for those ectoparasites. Passive anting, the bird will look like it's sunning, and it's probably doing both at the same time on an ant hill, and the ants crawl all over the bird's body, getting into all the nooks and crannies of the feathers. And the same thing is happening. Their formic acid from the ant's body is driving away the lice and mites.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I did want to take you back about a dozen years. You did what you titled a conservation big year. Now, a number of the guests in the book, Why We Love Birding, and a number of the guests who are going to be on this podcast have done big years. Last week was Greg Miller, who wound up being, the key figure in the book and the movie, The Big Year. But also had Ken Kaufman, who hitchhiked, and Dorian Anderson, who bicycled around. Greg Miller worked full time. Everybody seems to have a little bit of a hook or a story about their big year, rather than just going out and trying to find all of them. Now, you called yours the conservation big year, which I believe you did in 2013. So tell us what a conservation big year is.
Well, no matter how you do a big year, you're using a lot of energy. Even Ken Coffin, he minimized it by doing so much hitchhiking because the car was going to be going that way anyway. But when you are doing a real green analysis, he was getting good mileage because he was always sharing the mileage with the driver. But it takes a lot of travel to get around the country to see a lot of birds. I tried to minimize that by combining by doing as much driving as I could as opposed to flying, driving our Prius, which was, I got, I averaged about 48 miles per gallon. And on some of the trips, I averaged better than 50 miles per gallon. Um, and I also did not chase um, I chased some rarities, birds that are very hard to find, but they were native rarities that were in conservation trouble. I took a few birding tours to get them, to get Gunnison sage grouse and the greater sage grouse in Colorado, the lesser prairie chicken, and things that are in big trouble. Those were the rarities I wanted to chase. And I had been planning on doing a continental big year, trying to get up to Alaska and stuff. But my mother-in-law had to come and live with us starting the December before, and we spent our family's entire discretionary income making our downstairs bathroom handicapped accessible and stuff. And so I didn't have the money, and also, I had to be home when my husband wasn't because she needed a lot of help. So I scaled it back to a lower 48 big year, and I kept my focus. I also, because we didn't have much money, um, I got speaking gigs in places. I had one wonderful one in uh, Delaware, so that I could do the birding there while I was there anyway. And I did that in Maine, and I did that for quite a few different things. Oklahoma, that's how I got my Swainson's warbler was in eastern Oklahoma during my big year. I got it because I had a speaking gig there. So I was chasing down as many birds as I could. I knew I wasn't going to get to 600, though I actually did get to 603 if not by the ABA rules at the time, because they weren't letting you count Aplomado falcons in Texas yet. They weren't letting you count California condors anywhere yet because the California condors were still getting so much help. And even today, they are. Just this week, a California condor died from lead poisoning. It was by the time they retrieved it, it was too late for them to bring it back to health. But that was what I was writing about, was the trouble these birds were in. So I didn't care if they didn't count for the ABA rules. They counted for what I wanted to do, is educate people about them. But
Well,
it was the funnest year. It was so fun.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you for that. Now, you have done some traveling out of the country. I believe you've recently been to Cuba.
Yeah, in February, I got to go to Cuba, and it was just a wonderful trip. I'd been there once before in 2016, at the tail end of the uh, Obama loosening up the rules for travel to Cuba. And so I could bring back cigars and I could bring back rum for my son's birthday.
Are you a
It was
cigar
great.
smoker, Laura?
No, I have friends who are that I gave them away to, but I did keep one on New Year's Eve at midnight. My husband and I went on the front porch. We have a picture of us smoking this a Cuban cigar, and then our New Year's resolution was to quit smoking, and we did it because
Now,
that's
you
the only
sent me
time.
some pictures yesterday. Did you include the one of you and your husband smoking?
Tragically, I did not include the smoking one.
Yeah, I used to give up broccoli for Lent, but my priest said that really didn't count. So I think we followed a similar pattern there.
Correct.
My wife gives up drinking every year, but she's never had a drink, so I don't think it's a bit of a challenge for her at all. So was it fantastic birding in Cuba?
Oh, it was wonderful. I did that one. It was sponsored by the company that used to be Eagle Optics and Zeiss. And we had a really good guide and we got to see a lot of cool birds. But the trip this year, even though a lot of it was much harder than the first time around, we have so many legal the U.S. embargo, which they actually call a blockade, because we're keeping them from getting essential medicine and all kinds of things. Uh, but it's very difficult to get fuel, and our drivers were sanctioned by the government to be able to buy fuel, even though it's so limited. But the gas stations, often the gas stations didn't have gas, and the ones that did have gas often didn't have electricity to pump the gas. So it was very stressful for our driver, but it was just an amazing trip. And we had a fantastic guide, Canzares, and he just was wonderful. So I could savor Cuban toadies to my heart's content.
Which is what
That's the
you had
most
told me in
adorable
advance
bird
of
on
the
the
trip.
planet.
Yeah, you had
Hmm?
said in advance of the trip that that's what you wanted to see, right? The Cuban toadies.
Yeah, I'd seen them before. I had a great picture of them in 2016, but I got to savor them this time. Our guide on the previous trip, whose name I cannot remember, when we saw one Cuban toady, that was enough, right? Everybody saw it, so he didn't stop for others. It wasn't as fun as this one, and this one we saw more species too. Also, my first tour was in the winter, October, and the bee hummingbirds, the tiniest bird on the planet, had the males molt out of their beautiful feathers for the winter there. I didn't realize that. And this time I was there in right when they were starting to molt back into their breeding feathers, and oh, they were so beautiful. It was really fun.
Well, that sounds fantastic, and it's kind of cool that you have to differentiate between one trip and the other. Most of us have not been fortunate enough to have been to Cuba even once, so
Well,
it's neat that you've gotten to go twice.
that's a funny thing about how a lot of us are. I just realized that in August, I will have known my husband for 60 years. And we've been married for 53 years. And
I
I
thought you
like,
were only 50 years old.
I'm 73 years old. I got married when I had just turned 20, and he had just turned 21. We went to high school together. But yeah, I met him on freshman registration day. But I like, and my three favorite birds in the world are the black-capped chickadee, the blue jay, and the pileated woodpecker. Those are all backyard birds. I tend to love things the more I have them around. For me, it's not an absence makes the heart grow fonder thing. So I like to go back to places I've been to
Okay.
before. And
Well,
so that's why I yearned to go back to Cuba rather than going to new places with the same amount of money.
well, that's a good bit of news for your husband that you grow fonder of things as you spend more time with them. And we are going to talk about black cap chickadees. We won't be done until we've done that. But I wanted to ask you, since you've been on some of these trips, we're going to talk next about the dry tortugas. But are you a lister? Do you keep an eBird list? Do you have a life
Oh
list?
yeah, I no one should go through life listlessly.
I like that. I might use that. Thank you very much. All
That
right.
was the last line in my first book.
Okay. I did not know that. I haven't read that one, but I will steal that line. I'll be sure to use it because a number of the guests in the book that you're going to be in, Why We Love Birds, a number of them are non-birders. Some of them who are a little closer to my age or your age regret not having kept a list. that their memory in their late 60s or 70s is not what they thought it would be forever. And so that's an interesting thing. For me, it's just part of my OCD, and I like to be able to jog my memory when someone says, I get some of them mixed up, some of the birds, and so someone says, well, have you seen this particular sparrow? I need to double check. So I go back to my list and check. I don't tattoo the number on my forehead or anything, but it is a nice record keeper. Hey, tell me about the dry tortugas.
I yearned to go to the Dry Tortugas for a long time because I love magnificent frigate birds. Uh, our son lives in Florida, so we've gone to Florida many times and down to the Everglades, down to the Keys. And so I've seen magnificent frigate birds there. I've seen them in Texas. I've seen them, along the Gulf and stuff, and along the ocean. I've seen them in Mexico, but I wanted to see one with its throat inflated. And the only
That
place
huge
in,
red.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a big balloon. It is really amazing and cool. And my, so my husband and I went there once in May back in the 90s. And um, I saw a few that had it slightly inflated, but by then it had gotten a little paler, and I didn't see. We took the ferry out and took the ferry back, and so we didn't get close to the one up extension. Is it? I can't remember which of the little tiny keys it is where they're actually breeding, but so I decided to take a Victory Manual nature tour for this one because, first off, I adore their guide, Rafael Galvez, who has done the South Florida and the Keys trips, but he's the one who leads the Dry Tortugas one, which is strictly to the Dry Tortugas. We're on a boat for 3 nights. And so we get out there and we don't have to go back that day, and they could use dinghies to bring us to really close to where the frigate birds were showing off, because the island that they're on, you can't walk to. You can't get on that island. The only way you can see it is by a small boat that won't scare them. So it was really wonderful. We had a red-footed booby with them too, and those are recorded regularly in the dry tortugas, just usually one, and it's not every time, but I got really nice pictures of it, so I was thrilled.
Well, that sounds like a great trip. So before I let you go today, um, black cap chickadees. That's an important bird in your life, I think, not just from a birding point of view, but it's just an important part of your life. Tell us why that's your favorite bird and why it's so important to you.
The black-capped chickadee is the very first bird I ever saw in my life through binoculars. I got a field guide and binoculars for Christmas. My husband told his mom to buy me those for Christmas in 1974. I read the field guide, the Peterson guide, cover to cover. And then I he mentioned the Golden Guide, so I went to the bookstore and spent $3.95 for a copy of the Golden Guide, read that cover to cover. And so that all started on Christmas. And then I also went to the Michigan State University Library and checked out Joseph Hickey's A Guide to Bird Watching. I decided I wasn't going to pick up the binoculars again after that Christmas day. I put them back in the box and did not touch them until I was ready and felt qualified to be a bird watcher. So I read the field guides. Hickey explained how to keep a life list and how important it was to keep a life list. So I set out on March 2nd, 1975, with my binoculars around my neck to find a bird to be the number one bird on my life list. And it was the black-capped chickadee. And it was such a nice black-capped chickadee that it stuck around while I started. I used the Golden Guide, and I started, at the very beginning, Common Loon, rifled through the pages, stuck my finger in a page with birds that looked like my bird, and kept going in case there were more. And the black pole warbler looked like my bird a little bit, but it had streaks on its back, and it didn't have the whole, um, chin. uh, it was, just black here and here.
Mhm.
So I knew that wasn't it. And I kept going. There were no others. So I go back to the chickadee page. We were in southern Michigan, and I was geographically impaired, shall we say. So I wasn't 100% sure I was at the bottom of the black-capped chickadees range or at the top of the Carolina chickadees range. But the field guide said you could distinguish them by their sound. All the other characteristics, like the Carolina had a cleaner edge to the bib, and the black-capped chickadee had rustier sides. But those were both comparisons. Wouldn't I need to see both to tell which had the cleaner or the rustier? So I listened carefully, and when the bird finally left, and it stuck around me during all this deliberation, and when it finally left, I charged to my car, drove to the university library, and listened because I knew they had records in there. And I listened, and that's how I verified number one on my life list, the black-capped chickadee. So to
I love that
reenact
story.
that,
You told that to me when I was interviewing you for the book, and I just love that story. And as a matter of fact, as we wrap up here, um, for those of you that listened last week, which was our first show, Greg Miller was the guest. I introduced a segment called Field Notes, which is going to come following the interviews of every show, and I'm going to highlight a particular animal and some fun facts about that animal. Just a little 5-minute segment, just to kind of have a fun thing. Last week was northern sea otters. I had just gotten back from a trip to Alaska, so following my conversation with Greg, I talked about northern sea otters. But today, in Laura's honor, when I do Field Notes, it's going to be black-capped chickadees. So I've been researching them. I've found some really fun facts about them, and I'm looking forward to sharing them. And when it's done, I'll send it to you, Laura, so you can be sure to hear it. But it's
well,
in your honor, and it's my way of saying thank you very much for being a part of this and being part of the book and being a part of my life. I appreciate all of those things. So
ditto.
go ahead.
I said ditto. Thank you for being you.
You're welcome. And for the listeners and the viewers, really thank you so much for being a part of this. There's absolutely no way you listen to Laura for 30 or 40 minutes and didn't learn things and have things to research. I know if I ask her a single question, I usually get back an email with a fairly lengthy answer that forces me to do some research and look into things I hadn't thought of. And I love that about her. So I'm hoping you get a chance to do some of that based on this conversation. And stay tuned for the Field Notes for the black-capped chickadee. And I'll be back next week with another guest and hopefully some more entertainment and some more information for all of you. So have a fantastic day. Laura, thank you again. And everybody take care and be healthy. Hello, and thank you for joining me today on this week's Field Notes. I'm excited about this one. It should be a fun one. It's black-capped chickadees. And today's guest was Laura Erickson. It's her all-time favorite bird, so I thought it would be appropriate. And I'm just going to share a few black-capped chickadee facts with you. Starting with, they say their own name. When you listen to them sing, it's kind of a chickadee-dee-dee. And that call isn't just cute. It's really a communication code. The more D's at the end, the more urgent the warning. So 5 or 6 D's, D, 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 D. That's a hawk. D, D, that's probably just a squirrel, not a real dangerous thing for them. But when you're listening, it's worth listening for that. They're pretty smart little birds. They're brainiacs, some would say. And every fall, their brains actually grow new neurons to help them remember where they stash their food. And in the winter, they can recall hundreds of hiding spots. Not as many as our corvids do, but still, I would say pretty impressive to be able to remember that. They are tiny little birds. They weigh less than a AAA battery or less than a dozen paper clips. It's just hard to imagine there's anything there, but there is. And even as tiny as they are survival champs. They can endure up to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I've never been in minus 40, but I did get in minus 36 up at Sax-Zim Bog. And I got to tell you, man, that was pretty cold. And if all I had was a couple of feathers, I'm not sure I would have made it. But these guys, they fluff their feathers, they lower their body temperature, kind of a mini hibernation, and they make it through the night and then get up and go where they've memorized where all their meals are. So that's pretty cool. They love people. I think it's fair to say that. They're curious and they can be tame, often one of the first birds that come to feeders. I know the Carolina chickadees down here at my home do. And in some places, they will even eat from your hand. I haven't had that experience yet, but I've seen it. They are often a member of mixed flocks, which bring big benefits. So in the winter especially, you might find them with nuthatches and titmice and other small birds. They act kind of like a neighborhood watch, if you will. They're spot predators and sharing intel around the neighborhood. The more eyes looking out for predators, the better chance they have of surviving. They are a same house, same spouse bird. Generally are considered to be monogamous, and they have some nest fidelity. They like to come back to that same nest every year if they can. And that's a nest that they create, by the way. They are primary cavity nesters. So they look for some rotten wood where they can excavate their own nests. Obviously, a good, healthy hardwood tree. Those little beaks on that, even on a feisty little bird like a chickadee, couldn't get through. But they find some rotten wood, they can dig their way in. They are the state bird of not one, but two states, Massachusetts and Maine, which I think is pretty cool. There are 6 chickadees spread across the United States. The black-capped chickadee, the Carolina chickadee, the mountain chickadee, the chestnut-backed, the boreal, and the rarest of the U.S. chickadees, the Mexican chickadee, which is, not surprisingly, most often found in Mexico. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed those facts about the black-capped chickadee, a really cool bird. I hope you enjoyed the pictures you've been looking at. If you've got any questions for me, you can email me at scott@naturallyscott.com. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you plan on joining us next week and every week after that. Be safe and keep enjoying the great outdoors. Have a great day. Bye now.